it kind of reminds me of even the word, like when people say honestly.
Oh, they're getting ready to lie?
Well, yeah, that's what a lot of people say. I don't necessarily, I mean, I do think that that might be partly true, but I think sometimes but I had to get out of that habit, or I specifically stopped saying that word. Not because partly because people think you're lying, but mainly because in my line of work, they already think I'm lying anyway. So me saying honestly made me feel like, all right, now I'm just doing that thing that it's like, I'm a salesman, so you already think I'm lying to you. Now I'm using a phrase or a word in front of a sentence that people associate with someone about to tell you a lie. So like, let me just take that word out of my vocabulary, at least not out of my vocabulary, but in that usage. I did kind of, sometimes I found myself replacing it with frankly, which kind of serves the same purpose, but I don't think people associate frankly because frankly is more like, I'm just gonna tell it like it is, not like I'm trying. Honestly, it sounds more like what.
Well, when you're talking to someone and you're in the middle of a conversation and they start a sentence to you with honestly, what's the thought that comes in your head? Do you feel like they're getting ready to shovel a load your way when they say honestly?
Not initially, I don't think.
So what is your initial take when someone is looking at you and I go, Mark, honestly, and then whatever. What does your mind do to prepare you for what follows the word honestly?
I think I usually, what I associate that with is you're about to tell me something like bad.
That you're not going to like.
Yeah, maybe that's a better way to put it. You're going to tell me something that I'm not going to like, because it's like, which is kind of the way that I use, frankly, like in my job as an example. It's like, I want to be $500 a month. Well, frankly, that's not going to happen. This is a $60,000 car, and unless you put a significant amount down, so it's like I'm telling you something that you don't like. So I guess in a way that's how I take it, because it's like if you're gonna frame it as honestly, because a lot of times, let's be honest, I think a lot of us lie. But yeah, so I think in my mind, I wouldn't say I associate that phrase honesty with somebody about to lie, or honestly, I should say. I said honesty. I associate it more with something I'm not gonna like.
Okay, so the use of the term honestly as a precursor to saying something in your mind, the person is preparing you for an uncomfortable truth.
Correct.
Not necessarily that, as my initial response was, oh, they're getting ready to lie to you. Well, honestly, oh, here it comes.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, I like your interpretation better. That actually does make more sense.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I get it. A lot of people lie, and it's part of, daily life, basically. I mean, unfortunately, even though we've all decided it's bad, we all kind of do it to a certain extent, like I said a second ago, lying to, not hurt somebody's feelings, like, hey, did you catch the podcast? What'd you think? Oh,
yeah, it was great.
or they'll be like, honestly?
Yeah, honestly?
I thought it was terrible.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys were talking about, which,
Yeah, well, we had that one comment.
Yeah.
Which we talked about, which is kind of funny, because when you're trying to market and do things like that. Every once in a while, you come up with a short that doesn't quite make sense.
Right.
Separated from the larger context of the conversation of which it was a part of.
Correct. I guess we might as well just...
You want to jump into it?
Yeah. Welcome back to Occasionally Philosophical, the podcast, the father and son podcast, where we just talk about stuff and occasionally get philosophical.
Occasionally.
Anyways, I'm Mark still.
And I'm still Doug.
So
what do you want to do?
Well, we did plan this, so it's not like you just...
Well, yeah, all right.
But no. So if you've been here, if you've been here since the beginning, you know that we started this podcast talking about the book Ishmael, which short version is basically Daniel Quinn, this version on, I guess, what ultimately is causing the climate crisis and how, humans we live at odds with the world instead of with the world. I think that's what was that short phrase you used to describe it? An environmental...
Oh, it's a work of environmental philosophy.
That was it, yeah.
And it's part of there's a large pile of people that write in that vein.
So if you've been here since the beginning, if you've been following us since the beginning, you know that we started the first couple episodes or few episodes on Ishmael, which, had to do with kind of the same topic as this book, human exceptionalism, and how we separated ourselves from the rest of the planet.
Just to kind of pick up from that, you seem a little hesitant at this particular point. Have another cup of coffee, Mark.
First.
So when we started our podcast, when you approached me with the idea of doing this, you wanted to start with the book Ishmael, which we did. We spoke about it for a few weeks, and then we moved on to other things. And last week, I was online, on Google, and I saw an article, or apparently a writer had encountered this book and had written a little bit about it, and it sounded interesting. So I went and I looked, I looked it up like I always do, and I found a sample of it. And just in the first couple of pages of the introduction, I was like, oh, yeah, Mark and I got to talk about this one because this ties directly back, in my mind at least, to the themes that Daniel Quinn brought up in Ishmael, this idea that we've told a story that separates us from the world, that makes us dominant over it, right? And as a result, the general consensus, although there is debate about it, the general consensus is that we're on a path of, destroying the environment that supports life, not just for us, but for all life. And so the question then becomes, well, with so many news reports and scientific papers and stuff getting published with the potential collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Oscillating Current. Anyway, that brings warm water up from the Caribbean and that up into the North Atlantic, and then like cold water sinks and then goes around. And I read somewhere that one molecule of water, it takes like 10,000 years to make that entire circuit. But that apparently that keeps the winters in Europe from becoming like brutally cold kind of thing. So if that collapses, we have those risks, and glacier melts, and and yet in spite of all these stories, right, we keep burning fossil fuels, we keep on doing the kinds of things that these scientists are saying are causing this environmental degradation. So what's the deal? And Quinn's thesis was that we inherited like the wrong story.
Right.
And we talked about that. And we also talked about some criticisms that one could lay at the feet of Quinn. And one of them was the way he sort of, when he talked about Ishmael's life before he was captured, as this sort of idyllic jungle existence. You know, everything is just peace and love and all that kind of, right? And when we decided to take like a more critical look, one of the criticisms could have been from primatologists, you know, saying, hey, you don't really know that much about our primate relatives to make those kinds of broad claims. However, Christine Webb, in this book, kind of lays that, at least criticism, to rest in my mind. Now, I just finished reading the book yesterday. I haven't had a chance to really assimilate it all.
Yeah,
so
you and me.
I think
yeah.
our first conversation is going to be general first impressions, like what did we take from it, and then we can kind of dig into the details over some future episodes, maybe.
Yeah, it's, you know, the main theme, I guess, you know, the arrogant ape is ultimately the human superiority complex. You know, we think that's
Okay, well, why don't you start there, Mark? She calls it the human superiority complex. So what is the human superiority complex?
It's basically, I mean, to tie it back to Ishmael, it's kind of maps onto the taker mythology that the world is here for us to dominate, to control, and whatever, basically do whatever we want with it. You know, that we're separate from nature.
We're separate from nature. All right. So human exceptionalism then is the idea that there's nature and then there's humans.
Right.
Right. We're somehow removed from that.
Yeah. There's millions, billions, possibly life forms on this planet.
Trillions, I think, when you start, when you include all the bacteria, which later in the book she gets to that.
Which we'll get to, but yeah, so it's like you have, and like back to Ishmael, that quote from Ishmael that he says, this may come as a surprise to you, but you are just one of many life forms that inhabit this planet.
Yeah, you mentioned that as one of your favorite quotes from the book,
right? So yeah, it's like, and so I just, you know, you saw it, you sent it to me, you know, you initially, I believe, sent me the Audible link or whatever.
Yeah, I just told you, Mark, you got to check this one out.
Yeah, and I actually immediately purchased it from Audible, listened to the Audible version, and then thought, hey, you know what? I actually want to look at this book, you know, just not just read it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to underline things on an audiobook.
Yeah, I mean, they do have like a bookmark thing. So you can kind of just, but all it does is it just puts a place. So when you hit the bookmark, it just goes back to that
page.
Page and it reads that part. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I like this, how she starts the book with this quote from Hamlet, or from, what a piece of work is man, marvels Hamlet. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the paragon of animals. And she goes on to say, basically, like, with that short little paragraph or a couple lines, she pretty much sums up, or Shakespeare, I should say, sums up the human superiority complex.
Yes, that we are, as she puts it, human beings are the most clever, moral, and capable species on Earth. That's according to Shakespeare, right?
Right.
And there was a book, I never read it, but there was like a literary critic. He wrote Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, right? So, a lot of modern conceptions of what makes a human or what a human being is and what a man is, at least according to I think his name is Harold Bloom, I think. At any rate, according to his thesis, that much of what we assumed to be the nature of man, it can be traced pretty much to Shakespeare's plays and sonnets and what have you.
Right, and it's funny because she talks about it in where how like a lot of the I tried to read Shakespeare. I'll admit I'm not super familiar. I mean, I did read what I had to in high school or whatever, but she does talk about how like a lot of the characters in Hamlet specifically, but in a lot of his other works apparently, is that the hubris. Like the main character, it's always their hubris, and in Hamlet, it's his hubris that is his undoing, essentially, which essentially is us, is our hubris that we think that somehow we're separated from the entire rest of the planet is ultimately leading to our downfall.
Yeah. She says that at least it seems to be that psychologists have shown that it's like a fear of our own inadequacy that causes us to like elevate ourselves.
Right.
How does she put it? Overemphasize their own abilities and accomplishments to conceal actual feelings of shortcoming and failure.
Yeah.
Right. And I had written a margin note, like, is this unique to the West? And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I went, no. See, that's the function of the civilizational story, going back to Ishmael again.
Right.
What Daniel Quinn said, hey, once you've accepted that you're defective at that point, then yes, then this sort of elevating yourself almost seems like a natural consequence of that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, she begins the book by, okay, we've started with a quote that almost everybody knows from Hamlet.
Right.
We all had to read
it.
Hamlet at least once in high school, and most of us when we got to college and that we read it again.
Yeah.
Although we did get, we got exposed to the rest of, or a good sampling of Shakespeare's other works. But she makes note of the fact that we're not the biggest, the fastest, the strongest. We're not the most numerous. We're not the most long-lived. Right? And each one, she compares us to another species. So we're not the biggest. Nope, blue whales beat us there. We're not the fastest. Cheetahs are. We're not the strongest. Rhinoceros beetles are. We're not the numerous. There are more ants. We're not the longest lived. With sea sponges live longer than we do. Right? And so all of these things that whenever we try to elevate ourselves, if we look to the natural world, we're going to find ourselves humbled in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's why we ultimately clung to the mind idea, it for the longest time. Even I think Aristotle, back then it was, like our ability to reason, right?
Well, she does point out that lays a lot of the blame for this human superiority thing on, or human exceptionalism.
Human exceptionalism.
Exceptionalism at Aristotle's feet with his Scala Natura. Or whatever, however you say that.
Yeah.
But anyway, because that in the hands of the later scholastics became the great chain of being.
Right.
From whatever I'd have to look up the great chain of being, but with man at the top, right? Of this hierarchy. One of the things we were talking about before we turned the mics on, about how if we were dolphins and like trying to communicate with humans, we would, from the dolphin's point of view, we would be very defective, right, in our ability to communicate with them. One of the things that she points out in this introductory chapter is like if we tried to compare like our ability with echolocation with a dolphin, we would fail, or vision compared to an eagle.
Right.
And so on, over and over and over. And again, she doesn't beat a dead horse, right? She gives us a few examples to say that these comparisons that we make that elevate this human exceptionalism are arbitrary.
Well, and I know she did, and she also gets into, throughout the book is that the measuring stick, you know, the measuring stick is made for humans. You can't, like, when you have, the funny thing is some of these you know, different primates actually do well on a lot of these tests, even though they're like, there was one that I saw where it's like, and she mentions it. I forget which primate it was, and I don't want to say the wrong one, but basically it was interacting with a touchscreen, right?
Oh, I think this is the bonobos.
Yeah, and it's like you know, yeah, we interact with touchscreens all day, and even that is fairly new, you know. But it's like, I guess the point being is that the test that we use to test these animals are things that are normal for us to do, but are not necessarily normal for them to do. You know, so you're measuring, like, even back to your dolphin thing, I mentioned that me and my fiance talk about our cats. You know, my cat comes up to me and I'm pretty sure I know he's asking me for food, because whenever I come in the kitchen, he comes in the kitchen and starts meowing at me. But sometimes I feed him, sometimes I don't. And he's probably looking at me like, bro, I'm asking you for food and you're just looking at me. What's wrong with you? Like, you don't understand the words like that.
Well, there's that one guy online who does all those cat videos.
The bald guy, Jackson Galaxy.
Yeah. You know, and he talks about like cat communications and the way that cats actually communicate. And, you know, obviously, you know, I live alone with my two cats.
Right.
And I watch them a lot because I don't really watch TV that often. And, we've talked about this offline, but, you know, like the way that Shadow seems to be like the dominant cat in a lot of ways, but yet Sam is actually in charge, it seems like, because when Shadow wants to sit in my lap, he's kind of like looking around and then he'll climb up. But if he hears like Sam coming down the stairs or something like that, he looks around and then he just jumps off and climbs onto like the ottoman. Now, Sam doesn't always get in my lap all the time, but Shadow always likes to make room for him.
Right.
And I think, well, that's interesting, you know, because a lot of times when they're waiting for food, it's Shadow, the one that's up there with the, you know, whacking them. I'm like,
yeah.
what are you doing, cat?
Right.
So, but then, you know, like when they sit next to you and they're just sitting there and then all of a sudden they reach out with the one paw and they just put, like, they'll just lay it very softly on your leg. And then it turns out that you find out that maybe it's in this book or somewhere else, but like the pads on their paws have like multitudes of like nerve endings and stuff, like super sensitive, and so they can actually pick up on your stress level and stuff like that just by touching you.
Right. I believe they even, I don't remember her going in specifically about cats, but anyways, I do, but I've also read somewhere that like they also have like whiskers in their paws, like the similar type.
Oh, with that same sort of, yeah, because their whiskers are very sensitive too. But at any rate, it's this idea of that they occupy a different. There's a word it comes up in like chapter 2, where it's the German word Umwelt, like the world that you inhabit.
Yeah,
and everybody has one.
Right.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, this idea of human exceptionalism keeps getting reinforced all the time by people that theoretically should know better. Like, she makes a couple of quotes here. One philosopher, Roger Scruton, in 2017 New York Times op-ed, he wrote, "As persons, we inhabit a life world that is not reducible to the world of nature." Or another one, a geneticist, let's say Adam Rutherford, "We cannot satisfactorily match our behavior with other beasts, and claims that we can are often poor science." Right. So
Yeah.
you see, like it's built in, and people that study the animal world, that study nature, or philosophers that should at least be a little more critical, are stuck in this. There's nature, and that human beings have risen above it.
Right. Actually, I guess this is kind of along the same. Like when she talks about the paper, writing papers, and that like some professor or whatever, she wrote who when referring to an individual chimpanzee,
Right.
and they corrected it
They scratched it out and wrote
that.
that. Oh, that
Like
not
instead
it,
of the chimpanzee who groomed the other chimpanzee, it's the chimpanzee that groomed.
So it's an object instead of an individual.
Correct.
An individual.
Right.
Yeah, and then one of the public intellectuals that you do see a lot nowadays is that Yuval Harari, who wrote the book *Sapiens*.
Oh yeah.
Right, I have that book.
I haven't read it, but yeah, I've seen it.
But he says he gives like credit to the human for why we can cooperate in our billions, whereas chimpanzees cannot, and why we have reached the moon and split the atom and deciphered DNA, and they just play with sticks and bananas. Right. So even someone like Harari, who obviously, well educated, has a deep grasp of deep time. If you read the book *Sapiens*, so this is not there's no piker, he's not a pseudo intellectual pretending to know something. But even that human exceptionalism is just built in. It's one of those unquestioned assumptions.
Right.
That we noted when we first talked about Ishmael.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah,
Come on, Mark. You got to hit me with the quote that you hit me with as soon as you started listening to the book.
Oh yeah.
Don't let that one slide by. Come on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, here it is. I was right there. What makes us special is that we like to think it's so. That essentially the only reason why we are special is because we believe that we're special.
We tell ourselves
We
are.
tell ourselves that we are.
Because one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I hadn't, because you see it all the time. You see references to Homo sapiens sapiens, right?
Right.
And she gives the historical note that back to Carl Linnaeus, who coined the term Homo sapiens. And then later it became Homo sapiens sapiens. And the wisest of the wise.
Right.
So we really elevated ourselves. And then I thought, well, is that just a function of arrogance? Like we're just getting more full of ourselves as we get older. And I did a little digging, and it turns out that in order to differentiate modern humans from, say, humans 10,000 years ago, we've added the sapiens, like sapien.
Well,
To differentiate between modern humans and prehistoric.
I think she gets into it in chapter 3, but I'm pretty sure she calls that the difference imperative, or what?
Well, we'll get there.
We'll get there. But we had to differentiate ourselves, which I find funny because seeing ourselves in superlatives flies in the face of Darwinian notions of continuity between continuity between species. It's just a little side note. That's a funny thing about like reading words and you have your spoken vocabulary and then your reading vocabulary, and it's like I know the word continuity, but when you look at it, you're like continue.
Well, I think that's one of the things that many of the social critics on the decline in reading point out.
Yeah.
And but that's a side tangent. So in Christine Webb, she says, she makes the argument that the human exceptionalism or anthropocentrism, right? Which is, the technical term,
Yeah.
is the driving force behind the ecological crisis.
Right.
That's it.
Which back to once why we wanted to do this book is because that's essentially what Daniel Quinn is saying as well.
Yeah. And we want, I'm going to be dead in a few years. 15, hopefully, maybe 20 if I'm lucky. I need to start working out again. Which is actually, I do need to start working out again, but that's another story. She goes on to the way she puts it is that because the mindset is so pervasive, it underscores all of these other factors that people want to point at, right? Those are downstream from this anthropocentric idea. All right. Now, one of the things that tied into another discussion that we had on our podcast, remember when we talked about Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays, right? And that propaganda model, and how, in my mind at least, that ties back to the voice of Mother Culture, how the stories get disseminated through all the people. So right here, she says, this unfortunate, again, talking about this human supremacy, this unfortunate and dangerous way of viewing our world is a brainwashing of such major proportions that many people remain entirely unaware of it. Okay, so this is the voice of Mother Culture. That's the echo for me.
Yeah.
But then the echo to Bernays and Lippmann and the whole manufacture of consent, and that from a young age, the myth of human exceptionalism gets internalized and reinforced by society in various ways. In schools and textbooks, sermons, political campaigns, advertising, movies, holiday celebrations, language, and more. And those are all the vectors that Bernays talked about as being useful to get your message out.
Right.
And so now when I'm as these things fall together in my mind, and like I said, I just, I read this book, and as I'm reading this book in the margin notes as we go through it, I've got this reminds me of gerrymander in the absence of the sacred. Oh, this reminds me of that book. And all these things are coming together. So, but all right, there's two things that I want to separate out. One is that propaganda model that we talked about, and how the story of human exceptionalism follows the same path as the story of any advertising, any new product that's coming out, or an interpretation of a news event that we won't touch on.
Yeah.
Or things like that, that those are the vectors that you're looking at and saying, okay, am I hearing it echoed over and over? And so now, in addition to the voice of Mother Culture, now we're expanding what we're listening for to human exceptionalism or anthropocentrism,
right,
contained within that story.
One of the things you kind of stopped, but that quote you just read, she continues, the human exceptionalism has even seeped into our sciences, which is a part of a lot of the theme of the book overall, is just, how even scientists who are studying these things are still looking at it through this lens of human exceptionalism, which is what, partly why a lot of our science is not necessarily, we'll just say correct or complete. How about complete?
Yeah, I would say complete.
Yeah, it's never really complete in that, but it's the fact that, I think she mentions it in this, it's pretty soon here, but just, the fact that we test chimpanzees in captivity. Right.
Which is not their natural environment. So if you were captive, you wouldn't behave the same way that you're behaving right now.
Right. Which later on, I mean, we're still in the intro, but later on, she does tie that to the fact that, a prisoner, a human, Homo sapien prisoner, is not going to be the same do the same study on both of them, there's going to be differences because he's not in his natural environment.
Yeah, so like studies that would be conducted in prisons might not be representative of the population as a whole. One of the things that stood out early on in the book, which is also something like when we had our discussion about AI, right? And this projection, I guess, of another mind onto the AI, like we kind of talked about it a little bit regarding how you feel when it kind of compliments you, when it gives you that, oh, that's a great idea or brilliant or something like that, and how easily humans can project agency onto something that lacks it, right? That anthropomorphism, right? Yeah. And so one of the things that she ran into as a primatologist was her mentors or people advanced in her warning her against that anthropomorphism of projecting theories of mind onto these animals that she's observing. And she tells the story in this chapter about a baboon?
Yeah.
And the baboon's name was Bear.
Right.
Right. And what happened?
Well, basically what first happened was the day before, Bear and a dozen other baboons mobbed her colleague, right? Apparently she didn't get like seriously hurt, but they were slapping her and barking at her and what have you, right? That situation's over. Next day, she's walking, doing whatever, probably some more studies, and now they're coming at her. Like she's like, what does she say? I think she says they're making a beeline. This time, yeah, she says beeline. They made a beeline for me, and she says walking down a steep hill. So basically, she couldn't really do anything.
She couldn't run away.
Run away, essentially, right? Which could have been a bad idea anyways. But anyway, the baboon Bear and his, friends get to her, and basically he puts his hand on her leg gently and bares his teeth, which, according to her, I'm not a primatologist, but she is. So according to her, that is a pacifying gesture. That's something that baboons do to avert and resolve conflicts in each other. Basically, she interpreted that, and I would interpret that as well, the same way that he was making amends for the day before. This baboon knew what I knew and was trying to put things right, which goes into the theory.
So what the belief that human exceptionalism has is that baboons don't have an ability to project themselves into another entity like we do.
Right.
Like I can see the look on your face or know that I said something to you the last time we got together.
Yeah.
You know what? That probably hurt his feelings. I need to make that right. That's something that humans can do.
Wait, didn't we talk about something like that last week? Empathy? Anyways.
Well,
Check out last week's episode about empathy.
Yeah, a lot of what she talks about here is empathy in our animal relations. And so if we tied it back to our empathy versus sympathy discussion last week, we can see that maybe the denial of empathy, what do you call that? That sort of rabid denial of empathy that comes from some sectors of the far right, isn't really aware of the role that empathy plays across the entire biosphere.
Right.
But I thought that was a fascinating example of, and this is one of the things that got her thinking in these other terms, right? Like really looking at this human exceptionalism idea when everything that she had been taught up to that point got blown out of the water by this baboon coming up and saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because and yeah, the whole there's a lot of things that people think separate us from humans, but yeah, like that is one of the big ones. The ones that felt for a long time to be irrefutable. Like no, they're just. She mentions it too. Like Descartes pretty much described animals as just like they're just like machines, automatons. They don't really have any. They're just reacting. It's just instincts reacting to external stimuli. Or
Well, she lays a lot of the blame for the persistence of the human exceptionalist myth at Descartes' feet.
Yeah.
I mean, Aristotle's got a role in his Scala Natura, but then Descartes comes along in the, what is that, 17th century, I think, and basically separates mind stuff from material stuff. So there's a body, this thing, but then mind is something else. And so mind is what makes human. Therefore, humans are different from the animals.
Right.
And, vivisection, I mean, live surgeries and stuff were done because they can't feel pain. And in one of those weird things that I was at an APA conference 20 years ago or so, and someone had a book that basically was talking about a form of entertainment, or at least one of the chapters in the book was a form of entertainment in France around the time of the French Revolution was hanging cats by their tails upside down and setting them on fire. I don't know, like, it was, I saw it for like 3 minutes at this conference, and I was,
well, and that
it was such a high level of cruelty that I don't even want to know about that.
Yeah, but that once again goes back to the human exceptionalism, and there was a quote.
If any of our listeners have any knowledge of that, that would be nice for us to know.
Yeah, but there was a quote that's somewhere in towards the beginning of the book where she says basically that if you view the world as an object, its destruction is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you view any cats in this example as some kind of object or some kind of automaton that doesn't have a quote unquote soul, because that's another thing. It's like we have a soul, whatever that means, So stringing a cat up and lighting it on fire is just when your worldview is that way, it's probably if I lit this paper on fire, the paper.
Well, it's an object.
It's an object, right?
So she says that when we let the ideology of human supremacy, right, infiltrate science, it just leads us to construct tests that reinforce those biases.
Right. It actually reminds me. I don't know if Einstein actually said it, but there's that quote. If you judged a fish's ability to climb a tree, or what is it? If you judged a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you would think it was stupid or something, or maybe it was an elephant. But whatever. The point is like you're looking confused, like you've never even heard that before. So
I've heard something about the fish climbing a tree. I'm giving you that look because it doesn't sound like something that Einstein would have said. Not that he doesn't have a sense of humor or anything like that, but I just any luck?
Yes. The quote is everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. It is a great metaphor about how people have different talents, strengths, and I would also expand that to here's the human supremacy, a great metaphor for how people have different strengths. But I would argue all life.
She gets into language as well.
Correct. Yeah, that's like the second chapter, the unlearning part. But yeah, there's no solid evidence that Einstein wrote this. The earliest appearance of the quote seemed to come from motivational writers and speakers in the late 20th century.
Yeah, it's like that book I've talked to you about. In fact, the one that actually relates very well to both Daniel Quinn and what Christine Webb here is that dark matter of the mind. You know, how when we're little, we're absorbing the culture and it goes in unchallenged. So a lot of these ideas are absorbed there. But he begins that book saying that between stimulus and response, there's a pause. You know, there's a choice of how you act, and in that space is where true freedom lies. And it's attributed to Viktor Frankl. Except when you go to the Viktor Frankl like archives online, there's nothing that he wrote that says that. And then you dig a little deeper, and it turns out that quote entered the infosphere or whatever you want to call it via Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People guy. And he came across it somewhere in his research and just said, oh, that sounds like something Viktor Frankl would say. So he just did it. And that's how it ended up in the world as, or it ended up in that book as an epigraph to a chapter as a quote from Viktor Frankl when it's not really.
Yeah, speaking of that, I saw some other quote that was, because that's what some of the apparently, I don't know, man, anybody can write a book. That's like the short answer to that. Like anybody could write a book, so anybody could say anything, and as long as nobody checks it, you know. Because there was a similar story that I read where it was the same thing. It was like this person wrote a book, they attributed it to some person, and that person never, as far as we can tell from what's available, that person never said that, you know. So that's a lot of times how these rumors end up starting. But anyways,
back to our human superiority complex. Human exceptionalism suggests, right, that what is distinctive about us is more worthy and advanced than the distinguishing features of other forms of life, right? So when you look at everything, all life, what they have in common, okay, we take what separates humans, well, that's more worthy of praise than what makes a dolphin unique or what makes a bat unique or what makes a slime mold. Those things are interesting as hell. Right. She tells the story in here, I mean, later in the book when we get into like bacteria and slime molds and stuff, about how I think it's like the subway system around Tokyo is considered to be the most efficient in the world. And apparently when they built a scale model of Tokyo and then they put this slime mold, basically the slime mold rebuilt that subway system in finding its way around the buildings and stuff in the city.
Yeah.
Again, but see, that's a capability that we don't have. But why is that less worthy of our respect? Or at least the other thing that she talks a lot about in the book is that sense of awe
from nature.
Yeah. Whoa.
Well, and I know that feeling. I mean, fortunately now, you know, obviously I live in Western industrialized nation, but in this area of Westchester, there's at least paths. There's, you know, yeah, you still get the little man-made stuff because there's just like a random trash can there, or parts of the path are, I wouldn't say paved, but there's rocks, you know, to kind of designate the path part.
This is the path. This is where you walk as opposed to over there.
Yeah. So, but that feeling of just being in nature and looking around in these trees and just thinking like, once again, we don't live the longest. Like this tree's been here for who knows how long, you know, way longer than I've been alive, you know. So yeah, I do. And because we spend so much of our time, I mean, like if I look around this room right now, there's not one other than those flowers that nobody can see on camera. there's nothing in this room that's natural. That's fake. I mean, it simulates a natural plant, but it's a fake plant. I mean,
okay. That's not a real plant. Gotcha.
no, that's just to make the litter box look less like a litter box.
Oh, to hide it.
Yeah.
It's just a litter box disguise.
Yeah.
So she goes on to say that, now here's the part that, again, ties back to me, to Daniel Quinn and the voice of Mother Culture. Because here she says that human exceptionalism has been repeated and left unchallenged to the point that we hardly recognize it as a story anymore. Instead, we've internalized it as a fact.
Yeah.
Right? And you talked a little bit about how my tossing Ishmael at you all those years ago was the first time that you actually looked at your own assumptions. I think you mentioned something like that.
Yeah.
And so here we don't recognize it as a story. And this is Daniel Quinn. We internalize and are enacting a story, and we don't even realize that we could choose.
Well, I like that was another thing just that I like that for me connected it to Ishmael is because earlier, a few pages back, she says the myth of human exceptionalism.
Which is
the same. It's a myth because it's the story that you tell of how we got here.
Right.
Why are we exceptional? Because we said we are, basically, is what it comes down to. But you said something. You had mentioned the slime mold. I also like the fact that like she mentioned like a termite hill. It's essentially like if we imitate. So there's the termite hill that keeps cool. It has its own thermodynamic properties, or I'm not sure if that's
thermoregulation.
Thermoregulation. That's what so like it doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold. And there was other things about the structure that she pointed out, but essentially scientists noticed this. And then somewhere they basically tried to build a building to emulate that.
Well, they used those
principles
to design a building somewhere in those parts of the desert areas of the world, probably somewhere in the Middle East. It's in the book.
It's in the book. We'll get there. Where
this
is the intro part. But yeah,
like I said, there's a lot here to unpack for us, and as we just finished reading it, it's still kind of taking time to settle in, and I don't even had a chance to. I mean, there's some. The interest that one of the things that I like about in my first read through is that she does seem aware of objections that can be tossed her way, like on this thesis, and has a ready answer. So, but we'll get into that a little bit more. One of the things that she says in this first chapter that I think you might have mentioned is when we're like the scientists that are studying all these other biology, plants and animals and what have you, they remove them, like they're removed from their natural environment. So she says here that when we're like looking at chimpanzees or bonobos or whatever in captivity, we assume that these caged chimpanzees and free human populations are representative of each species, but they're not. Because a free human population and a imprisoned chimpanzee population are not living under the same conditions.
Right.
One's free, the other one isn't.
Yeah.
One's in their natural environment, the other one isn't.
Right.
So any results that I would get, or at least this is the thesis, is that any results that I would get from a population tested in an unnatural environment will not translate to how those same chimpanzees would behave in a natural environment.
Right. And part of it is they're not in the the jungle or wherever, so their natural physical environment they're also not, because she says, they keep them separated, and it's like babies are separated from their mothers, and
Right, they're kept in individual cages so they can't groom each other.
and so it's like none of these normal things that they do, they can't do them.
Right.
So now it's like you say, oh well, they're not cooperative, because it's like it's like, in a way, it's like that chimpanzee's like, I don't even know this dude. Like, you want me to cooperate? Like, I don't even know him. He's just because he looks like me, doesn't mean like we have anything in common or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just one kind of
it's the contrived nature of the circumstances that, because you're trying to compare, because what she's making the point that, okay, we're using human exceptionalism, human is the standard. So how do these chimpanzees or bonobos or gorillas or vervet monkeys or whatever compare to humans, right? Well, first of all, the test conditions aren't the same, because these are, we talked about how they're captive and separated and all that kind of stuff. So they're in a high stress condition. They're highly stressed. And now you're going, well, you're taking a highly stressed primate and you're testing it on things that relaxed humans do. Well, if you were to run the same test between a relaxed human and a highly stressed human, you would probably, get some significant differences as well.
correct.
But then she goes on, not only are we're like comparing primates in an unnatural situation to what we say are like representative humans, but that the humans that are being compared aren't representative of the entirety of humans, because most of the laboratories are using their human test subjects drawn from the weird countries, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Yeah.
So and that brings with it a whole set of these unchallenged, unstated assumptions. So the tests that are administered are almost designed for the Western, educated, industrial, rich, democratic mindset, which then also ties back to like IQ testing and how those cultural biases get built in. Right.
Yeah. Well, right. And this is just something that's kind of a side note, but you just so I just watched a video recently on this, according to the video, it says it's the last hunter-gatherer tribe in Africa. Whether or not that's clickbait and it is the actual last one, or they just wanted me to click on the video, but the point being is that this is this hunter-gatherer tribe. And the reason why I bring this up, because I found it interesting because of the weird, the Western people versus we're not, how we're not a representative of the whole species. They're all sitting there. They just finished hunting, right? And this, American guy, as a matter of fact, I think he's from Jersey. But anyways, he asked them, well, which one of you is the best hunter? And he looks at him like, what are you talking about? We all hunt. And he goes, yeah, but like one of you has to be like better than the other ones. And like just the confusion on his face was just like, see, that's part of weird culture. It's like this competition. It's like they're just like, no, we all go hunt. We all try to get food, and we all come back and we all eat it. Like, what do you mean who's better or who hunts best? Or like, it's like that concept is just so foreign to them. I just, so her point of the weird people not being a representation of all humans, that just reminded me of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that, as we're looking at these tests that are being administered, right, and these comparisons, right? Well, in that Dark Matter of the Mind, the Daniel Everett, he went down South America and he was working with an indigenous tribe there, and I want to say Piraha, I think is how he says it. The pronunciation does not look exactly like the word on the page. I'll just tell you that. But I've seen him speak like on those YouTube lecture circuits on the book.
Yeah.
Right. So he does say the name, and I think I got it pretty close. But when he first went down there, he went down there as a Christian missionary, right? So he was going to bring the message of Jesus to these poor, benighted or, deprived souls, right? And he failed miserably. And it was part of that failure that, spurred his research into this other area. But he notes in the book about a dozen assumptions that are in the Bible that these people have absolutely no contact with. They couldn't even relate to if they tried,
right.
Because the world that the Bible was written in, the Middle East, desert, hot, is so different from the Amazon rainforest as to, they're literally not even in the same world anymore. And so I thought that was interesting. And she talks also here about how the problem with these studies, right, when we set them up, is that all we really find out is how well other species do at things that we're great at.
Right.
Right. And that's all these tests are. We're really good at this kind of reasoning. So let's conduct a test and see if a bonobo can do it.
That.
Well, it can't. So obviously we're better.
Right.
And this attitude then carries through a lot of these other scientific endeavors. But she says, it tells us very little about other species' own evolved cognitive adaptations, right? So this goes back to like Darwin and things like that, where the intelligence as it's like defined here, and we'll unpack that a lot more as we go forward, but it's the ability to respond to the environment that you're in a way that fosters your survival and whatever.
Right.
So like the definition of intelligence that we use for humans is way too narrow.
It's narrow in the sense that, it's what we used to survive.
To get where we are.
Right. To get where we are. Cause it's like, we'll obviously talk about this, not obviously, but we will talk about this more in the future because we haven't even got past the intro yet. I mean, we've touched on some of the things that she talks about later on, but.
Well, here's an example.
Yeah.
From the book. It would be like presenting weird human beings with sticks, rocks, and nuts of varying sizes and measuring their intelligence by comparing their performance with that of chimps on termite fishing or nut cracking tasks.
Correct.
And then she goes, when you measure the world with a ruler made for humans, other species will what? Inevitably come up short.
Yeah, it's and she just the last thing. This one was just funny because I've always liked The Onion, but it says the Onion article title was "Study: Dolphins Not So Intelligent on Land."
There you go.
But yeah, so we will get into this more. If you haven't already, you should probably be questioning the human superiority, at least start asking yourself, like, are we really that, I did like that. That the stick thing, like if you gave this is a personal story that sort of has to do with this, but one time, it was just because it was sticks and rocks. And anyways, I guess I've been a little bit more in touch with nature for a while because while back, it's got to be like at least 15 years now, I locked my keys in my car, which I've been known to do quite a few times in my life. But this particular time, I didn't have any tools or any man-made tools. One of the other things that quote unquote separates us from animals, even though animals use tools as well, but we'll get into that. But point being is I was able to get my keys out of my car with 2 rocks and a branch I broke off of a tree.
We will have to go a little bit deeper into that.
I used what I had.
Indeed.
I joked in the past.
You didn't break a window, did you?
No. I could tell you super quick what I did. I took 2 rocks and I stuffed them in the door jamb, and then I used the stick to hit I broke a branch off of a tree and I used that to hit the lock button.
So you wedged the window out and to make enough room for the stick so that you could hit the button to unlock.
Yeah, that's the simple. Yeah. I mean, it took me a while because I was using 2 rocks and a stick. Like, had I had a coat hanger and something, but whatever. Anyways, yeah, so that's how I did that. But yeah, we'll get into this more in probably maybe the next episode. But yeah, so short version is we aren't as great as we seem, and we're well. Actually, I don't even want to say it that way because one of the things in this book, one of the quotes of somebody talking about the book was basically saying that they like appreciated how it wasn't so much tearing humans down. Mostly what she did was just say, hey, all these other animals are exceptional in their own ways as well.
Yeah, well, if you say that human exceptionalism is a myth and you take that away, that humans are just part of this, big ball of life on Earth, then her hope is that if enough people can start thinking that way, right, that we're part of this. And if we look at these other species and really look at them and saying, how did they adapt to their environment? How did they figure this out? How do they communicate with each other? And just by doing that, she seems to believe, when we get to the end of the book, we'll start, like her hope for the future kind of thing. But she seems to believe that at least accepting that as a starting point can help slow down the destruction that, the path of destruction that we're on. I'm finding so many things in here that are lighting up all these little things in my head of books that I read 5 years ago, 15 years ago, that are starting to fall together, and that it runs with the main theme, I think, of our podcast here, which is how can we, what can we do now to make the world a little bit more comfortable for us and preserve it for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. So we, I guess that's it. Thank you once again. If you're here, this is episode 11 of Occasionally Philosophical. So yeah, we will be picking up the Arrogant Ape probably next episode and maybe a little beyond, but at the very least the next episode. So anyways, that's enough rambling. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Once again, I'm Mark, and you are?
Dad.
Yeah.
I'm Doug. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Occasionally Philosophical.